Welcome to Yahava KoffeeWorks. Today we're going to take you on an adventure. We're going to show you the tasting bench, which is where you can try our coffees and learn a lot about coffee. We're also going to show you a little bit about the roasting process and how coffee comes to go from that green bean all the way through to the roasted product. And then we're going to show you, most importantly, how to make a great cup of coffee. My name's Gary and I work for Yahava KoffeeWorks. I'm one of the managers but also the head roaster. The whole idea of what we're doing is trying to educate people that coffee is an adventure. And so we say adventure in a cup, and that's because there's not just one cup of coffee. There's lots of different coffees and we want to show you through those and give you a bit of an idea that there's more to coffee than just a cup of coffee in front of you. There's lots of different tastes and lots of beautiful, beautiful coffees out there. So we want to get them, find them and bring them back to you. So we have both single origin coffees and blends. The idea of a single origin is that the coffee is just from one country, but usually within that is one region or one particular farm. Coffee used to be, you get coffee that's say Brazilian coffee and it all tastes the same. And that's because all the coffee used to be brought together. These days, there's an emphasis on processing the coffee either directly at the farm or at a mill very close to the farm. So then you get specific flavours and taste just because of how that coffee was grown and how that coffee was picked at the farm. So what we want to do with our single origins is highlight those things and show you why it is that coffee tastes that way.
When you are tasting coffee or wine, that first sip is always really full and it almost so much going on. So don't really judge your coffee straight away. It's good too, but if you're adding milk and sugar, don't add any milk and sugar until about 3 or 4 sips, until you kind of have a good idea of the flavours that are going on. Because no matter what, that first sip, even for me, I drink coffee all day, every day, and I do many tastings, that first sip is always quite full on. Alrighty, so the temperature that I'm using to brew my coffee is no cooler than 85 degrees. So if I'm brewing hot, I don't want anything colder than about 85 degrees because you see here, there's so many natural oils in coffee and I mean, cold water just doesn't cut it to get oils out. So using a really good hot temperature between 85 to 95 degrees is a really good way to go. I mean, if you don't have a thermometer, just boil the kettle, let it sit for 5 minutes and that should cool down enough. So a lot of people ask us when they first taste the coffee, why it is a little bit weak? But technically, yes, it is, but it's just because majority of our population is now used to espresso, and that is a really, really close concentration of coffee and water. This here is 1 part coffee, 18 parts water. So there is a lot of water involved, and your espresso is a much, much closer, something to 3 to 5 parts water, so much closer, and extraction is very different as well. So I let this sit for about a minute to maximum 4 minutes, depending on what coffee and what flavors we want to bring out, we'll change the brewing time. You see here, coffee naturally rises. So after that 4 minutes, and even after a minute, most of my coffee's risen to the top here. So really smell, see what you smell, and whatever first comes to mind is generally what is actually happening in there. So this one's beautifully smoky, El Salvador. It's really sweet, so that helps balance out those two flavours. It's a little bit juicy as well, and what that does is it really brings all the flavours forward because basically when something's quite juicy, you salivate, so it really brings it all forward. See that there? I'm slurping, I'm spraying everywhere, aerating, it really enhances all those flavours so I can really get a good understanding of what's going on. Oh, that's a cowbell. So what that means is we've got a roasting demonstration, so you just head over to the roaster around there, see Gary and he'll explain a little about that process for you.
Okay, so we've got here the roaster, and what we like to do whenever we can is get people around to show them a bit about the roasting process and to help you kind of understand what goes into roasting really good coffee. And at any point in the roast, we can take out a sample and see how the roast is developing. So you can see here some samples, so the raw coffee, about 6 minutes into the roast, and where we are right now in the roast, which is about 11 minutes into it. We're going to enter what's called first crack, and it's at first crack where the coffee starts to actually taste like coffee, okay? So before then, anything in this scoop here, if you were to try and brew it as a cup of coffee, it would be really sour and astringent, nothing really like our coffee at all. So as much as where the coffee's from and how it's grown, it's not until we actually roast the coffee that we bring those flavours out. So we're coming up to the last sort of minute or two in the roaster here. and this is when all the fun happens. And as a roaster, this is when we really have to watch the coffee to make sure we get it out at the right depth. We'll see it browning further in colour. We'll see it expanding in size slightly more, and then it'll kind of look the way that you guys kind of imagine coffee to look, and that's when we're getting closer to dropping it out. Okay, here we go. So you hear that nice vibrant cracking sound in the tray as we drop it out. The important thing now is that we cool this coffee down really quickly, and so that's what's going on here. We've just got the agitator just keeping the coffee moving so that heat can escape from the roast. Otherwise this coffee is so hot, and you can feel it here, all the heat coming off it. It's so hot that it'll just keep roasting. So that's why it's very important that we keep this stirrer moving. We're also sucking air down through the roast to get the bite of the heat out of it and to stop that roasting process. And if I just take one more scoop, you can see the whole process there and how that coffee has ended up looking from that green bean right the way through to the final product. How do we maintain quality in our batches? You know, we get a coffee in and we have that same coffee for a whole season. And what we want to do is always produce the best in that coffee. So whenever we get a new coffee in, we do what's called sample roasting. We roast the coffee to a few different depths and we find out where it's going to be at its best. And then that's obviously the way we're going to roast it on a roaster here. And then we need to be able to roast it that way every time. So these days we have software that we can actually track our profiles. So we'll track the coffee over the course of the roast and make sure that it's matching up to where we think the coffee is at its best. So if you taste the coffee on the tasting bench and you go, oh wow, I really love black gold, or I really love X-rated, or whichever the coffee is, you should be able to come back and get that coffee time and time again, and it'll taste the same every time. So we also have a couple of different changes that we can make in the roaster. Obviously every bean's slightly different, whether that be a smaller or a larger bean, and or whether that be like a washed process or a natural process coffee. And all these things lead to obviously how that coffee will roast in the roaster. So whenever we get a new coffee in, again, it's a lot of trial and error with the amount of heat we add or the amount of air that flows through the roaster to make sure that we're roasting these coffees to a profile that will suit it best. A lot of the time it used to be coffee in, coffee out, and it took as long as it took, and then we couldn't make many changes. But these days we can change the amount of burner that's going on, the amount of air that's actually flowing through the roaster, the temperature of the coffee as we drop it into the roast, and all these things will ultimately affect how the coffee ends up tasting. Okay, so once we've learnt a little bit about tasting some coffee and roasting some coffee, the other thing that we can do here is teach you how to make really good coffee. And I think the important thing to know is that learning how to make a really good cup of coffee can actually increase your appreciation for the cup. A lot of people might think that they don't really like coffee, or they might have tried coffee once and perhaps it wasn't a very good cup, or it was overly acidic or too full-bodied for their tastes. And then they think, oh, I don't drink coffee, I don't like coffee. But when you learn a little bit more about producing a really good cup of coffee and the effort that goes to roasting really good coffee and producing really good coffee at origin, you start to appreciate a little bit more and learn that there's not just one style of coffee, there's lots of different styles of coffee. So although you might not like, say for example, bright acidic coffee or rich dark roasts, you'll be able to find something that you'll really like. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to show you how to make a really good cup of coffee. Wherever possible, we want to grind the coffee on demand, just by the cup, so that we're getting the freshest coffee that we can. From here, I'm just going to groom the top. So there we go. After this, we're just going to wipe it, clean it up a little bit, and we're just going to put the tamper on and twist any coffee that's sitting on top into the puck, which we've done now. So now it comes time to brewing this shot of espresso, and so we're actually going to brew a double shot, and I've got a 12-ounce size cup here, and then what we're going to do is texture some milk for that. We might even pour some latte out into it. So you see the extraction's nice and even. The flow rate's kind of nice and thin to begin with. Starts to open up a little bit more as the extraction progresses. Now I'm going to texture the milk. It's very important when you're texturing the milk to just texture enough for the cups that you have to make. We don't want to reuse milk, otherwise we'll end up wasting it. And we want to heat the milk to about 65 degrees. And if I go well, I'll get some nice latte art out of this. We'll see how we go. There's no pressure at all. Now that's obviously something that I make look pretty easy, but there's a lot of practice that's gone into that. So there we go, there's a large latte for you. And make sure you come on down to Yahava KoffeeWorks in the Swan Valley to learn how to do this. Thank you.